Women over 60. If he does this, he'll cheat on you. The number one thing that makes men lose respect and eventually opens the door to infidelity is when you make yourself smaller to keep him comfortable. When you abandon your needs, your opinions, your boundaries, your entire life, all to avoid conflict or prove your devotion. It's the quiet disappearing act that destroys respect faster than anything else. And most women don't realize they're doing it until it's too late. This isn't about appearance or aging. It's about something far more fundamental. How a man sees you, values you, and whether he stays faithful or starts looking elsewhere for what he's no longer finding with you. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Infidelity rarely starts with attraction to someone else. It starts with disconnection, with a slow erosion of respect that makes a man stop seeing you as the woman he chose and start seeing you as someone he's simply stuck with. Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." The same principle applies to respect in relationships. No one can take your dignity unless you hand it over, piece by piece, through behaviors that communicate you've stopped valuing yourself. At 60 and beyond, we should know better. We should have learned through decades of experience that how we allow ourselves to be treated sets the standard for how we will be treated. Yet so many women still shrink themselves for men, believing sacrifice equals love, not realizing they're teaching him that their presence, their preferences, their very existence is negotiable. If you're ready to understand what truly protects a relationship, not from external threats, but from internal erosion, you're in the right place. This channel is dedicated to honest conversations about love, respect, and maintaining your dignity at every age. Consider subscribing if you want more truth instead of comfortable illusions. We're building a community of women who refuse to diminish themselves for anyone. The behavior that destroys respect, shrinking yourself. The number one thing that makes men lose respect, the behavior that slowly opens the door to infidelity, is this: making yourself smaller to keep him comfortable. Abandoning your needs, your opinions, your boundaries, your life, all in service of not making waves, not being difficult, not risking his displeasure. It's the quiet disappearing act so many women perform without even realizing they're doing it. When Dorothy met Alan, she was vibrant, opinionated, fully herself. She had strong friendships, regular book club meetings, firm opinions about politics and art, and how she wanted to spend her time. Alan was attracted to that woman, confident, independent, someone who knew her own mind and didn't apologize for it. But somewhere around month 6, Dorothy started shifting. She canceled book club when Alan wanted to have dinner. She stopped voicing opinions that differed from his. She rearranged her entire schedule around his availability. She convinced herself this was compromise, that this was what mature love looked like. What Dorothy didn't realize was that every time she made herself smaller, Alan respected her a little less. Not consciously. He probably couldn't have articulated what was changing. But the woman who'd intrigued him was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone who seemed to have no core, no center that existed independently of him. And respect doesn't survive that erosion. Men are attracted to strength, even when they say they want someone agreeable. They respect women who maintain their sense of self, who have boundaries they won't cross, who say no when something doesn't work for them.
When you abandon all of that to avoid conflict or prove your devotion, you're not strengthening the relationship. You're weakening the very foundation it needs to survive.
Why this behavior opens the door to infidelity. Here's what happens when a man loses respect for you. He stops seeing you clearly. You become background, someone who's always there, always accommodating, always bending to fit whatever shape he needs. And when someone else enters his orbit, someone who has boundaries, opinions, a life that doesn't revolve around him, the contrast is striking. Suddenly, he's reminded of what attraction actually feels like, and it has nothing to do with age or appearance. It has everything to do with presence, with a woman who takes up space rather than apologizing for existing in it. Catherine learned this the hard way. She'd spent 3 years with Michael, slowly erasing herself to keep things smooth. She never disagreed with him. She always deferred to his preferences. She made his happiness her entire focus, believing that's what would keep him faithful, that her devotion would be enough. Instead, he started an emotional affair with a colleague, a woman his age, who challenged him, who had strong opinions, who clearly had a full life that included him, but wasn't defined by him. When Catherine discovered it, she was devastated. But what Michael said during their final conversation haunted her. "I don't even know who you are anymore. You just agree with everything. You have no edges." He wasn't justifying what he'd done. There's no justification for betrayal, but he was naming what had been lost. The woman he'd fallen for had disappeared, replaced by someone so eager to please that she'd stopped being interesting, stopped being fully human. This is the painful truth many women don't want to hear. You cannot love someone into respecting you by erasing yourself. Respect requires boundaries, requires you to maintain enough separateness that the other person has to actually consider you, negotiate with you, meet you as an equal rather than simply absorbing you into their preferences and expectations. The subtle ways women shrink themselves. This behavior doesn't usually announce itself dramatically. It happens in small concessions that seem reasonable in the moment. You stop seeing friends because he doesn't particularly like them. You quit activities you enjoy because they take time away from him. You start agreeing with opinions you don't actually share because disagreement feels risky. You stop mentioning needs he's already dismissed once because you don't want to seem demanding. Ruth noticed this pattern in herself during a conversation with her daughter. She was explaining why she'd canceled her weekly pottery class, offering reasons that sounded practical. It was expensive, she didn't have time, she wasn't that good anyway. Her daughter looked at her and asked simply, "Is this about Stephen?" And Ruth realized with uncomfortable clarity that yes, it was entirely about Stephen, who'd never explicitly told her to quit, but had made enough comments about the cost and the time and whether it was really worth it, that she'd internalized his disapproval and made the decision for him. She'd done the same with her morning walks with Janet, with her volunteer work at the library, with small opinions about movies and books and how to spend weekends. She'd quietly negotiated herself down to almost nothing, believing she was being flexible and mature, not realizing she was teaching Stephen that her preferences didn't matter, that she could be shaped and molded without consequence. What behaviors have you noticed in yourself or others where women make themselves smaller? Share your thoughts in the comments. This conversation needs your voice. The tragedy is that women do this out of love, out of a desire to create harmony, out of fear that being fully themselves will be too much, too difficult, too demanding. But men don't actually respect the sacrifice. They just stop seeing you as someone whose needs matter, whose presence adds something irreplaceable to their lives.
What maintains respect and protects against betrayal?
The antidote isn't complicated, though it requires courage. Maintain yourself. Keep your friendships. Protect your interests and activities. Voice your actual opinions, especially when they differ from his. Set boundaries and hold them even when it's uncomfortable. Show up as a whole person with needs and preferences and limits, not as a supporting character in his life story. When Linda started dating George, she'd learned this lesson from previous relationships. She was clear from the beginning. She had Tuesday nights with friends, Sunday mornings for her painting, firm opinions about how she wanted to spend holidays. She didn't present these as negotiable or apologize for them. They were simply facts about who she was and how she lived. George respected her more, not less, for this clarity. He knew where he stood. He knew she chose to be with him rather than having nowhere else to be. He knew that when she said yes to something, it was genuine, not just automatic accommodation. The relationship had texture, had negotiation, had two people actually meeting each other, rather than one person absorbing the other. And when a woman from his past reached out with obvious interest, George wasn't tempted. Not because Linda was more attractive or younger or anything to do with comparison. Because he respected what he had, valued the woman who'd maintained herself fully, even in relationship, understood that what they'd built was rare and worth protecting. Respect isn't maintained through sacrifice and self-erasure. It's maintained through presence, through showing up fully as yourself, through demonstrating that you value yourself enough to expect others to do the same. When you shrink yourself, you're not making yourself more lovable. You're making yourself disappear. And it's very difficult to respect someone who isn't fully there.
Rebuilding what's been lost. If you recognize yourself in this pattern, if you've spent months or years making yourself smaller, and you're wondering if it's too late to reclaim what you've lost, hear this: it's not too late. Change is always possible, though it requires courage and consistency. Margaret had spent 2 years with Thomas, slowly diminishing herself in ways she hadn't fully acknowledged until a friend pointed it out. The conversation shook her, and she knew something had to shift. She didn't announce a dramatic transformation or issue ultimatums. She simply started saying no when things didn't work for her. She rejoined her hiking group. She voiced opinions that differed from his. She stopped automatically rearranging her schedule around his preferences. Thomas was confused at first, then frustrated. He'd gotten comfortable with the version of Margaret who never pushed back. But Margaret held steady. She stayed warm and loving, but she stopped shrinking. And gradually, something shifted in how Thomas saw her. The woman who'd been fading into wallpaper came back into focus. He started asking her opinion instead of assuming agreement. He started making plans that accommodated both their schedules instead of expecting her to accommodate his. Respect returned, slowly but surely, because Margaret had reclaimed herself. This doesn't always work. Sometimes men had become so comfortable with the diminished version of you that they resist any reclaiming of your full self. But that reveals important information too. A man who can't respect you when you stop shrinking yourself was never going to offer the kind of partnership worth having. Better to know that clearly than to spend years wondering why respect and fidelity kept eluding you.
The behavior that makes men lose respect, the thing that quietly opens the door to betrayal, isn't about aging or appearance or any of the superficial concerns we're taught to worry about. It's about self-abandonment, about making yourself so small and accommodating that you stop being a full person and become instead a collection of agreements and concessions. And no one can respect what isn't fully there, no matter how much they might appreciate the convenience.
At this stage of life, you've earned the right to take up space, to have needs and boundaries and opinions that don't require permission or apology. You've earned the right to show up fully in your relationships instead of performing endless flexibility in hopes of earning love through sacrifice. Real love doesn't require you to disappear. Real respect is built on seeing and valuing someone who is fully, unapologetically present. Protect yourself not by making yourself smaller, but by maintaining yourself completely. Keep your friendships, your interests, your voice, your boundaries. Let the relationship be built around two whole people meeting each other, not one person absorbing the other. That's what creates respect. That's what protects against the slow erosion that makes betrayal possible. If this conversation challenged you or gave you something to think about, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe and join our community of women who refuse to shrink themselves for anyone. We're having honest conversations here, the kind that sometimes make us uncomfortable, but always make us stronger. Until next time, keep taking up the space you deserve. Keep valuing yourself fully and keep showing up as exactly who you are. That's not too much. That's exactly right.